Well, we're on to Chapter 12, Lecture 2, and we are in this lecture going to discuss Part 2 of our Australia coverage with migration, minorities, and the economy. We'll start with Australia and migration. Migration into this region in more modern times began when the British began to relocate petty criminals and convicts here after losing the American War for Independence. That gained a slow start. What really increased numbers was the gold rush of the 1850, which brought much larger numbers of settlers. However, after that time, Britain continued to relocate petty criminals and convicts here in much larger numbers following the end of that gold rush. Today, in modern times, we tend to see an increasing number of Asian immigrations due to proximity and trade. Also, the need for workers in especially the western portion of the country in temporary jobs in mining. New immigration policy focuses on economic and social skills rather than some of the racist tendencies of the past, as we'll talk about next. Immigration is now was originally encouraged by Britain through a series of land grants and began to settle the region through something called the White Australian Policy. This policy restricted immigration policy, was a restricted immigration policy as the official term. It had a strong preference for people of British origin, exclusive of any non-white people. After World War II, it was amended to allow other European and Anglo-American settlers as long as they were white and English-speaking. This policy was quietly shelved in the 1970s. One of the most important developments in Australia was the White Australian Policy, or as we said, officially termed the Restricted Immigration Policy. Successive Australian governments were concerned that a relatively small white population controlling such a large land area, which was so close to the densely populated regions of Southeast Asia, put the country somehow at risk from invasion by a non-white set of immigrants. So this was outlawed by, this restriction, though, was outlawed by the Racial Discrimination Act of 1975. In recent years, Australia has increasingly welcomed Asian immigrations, especially Chinese, for economic reasons. Australia's minorities. The Aborigines were the original settlers into Australia. The Aborigines currently are about less than 500,000 people, or about 2% of the population. Their population is heavily concentrated in the Northern Territory. There has been significant movement of the Aborigines into big cities now as they offer greater economic opportunities, but generally Aborigines have been considered at the bottom of the economic ladder. The government has never apologized for what is known as the stolen generation. The stolen generation refers to at least 100,000 Aborigine children that were forcibly taken from their mothers to be brought up by whites. This practice ended in 1969. The rationale for this policy differed over time and among different administrations, but was essentially racial, to submerge the black population into a white majority, and only occasionally was justified on the grounds of protecting these children from alleged poverty or harm. Aborigine art in recent times has caught on as very popular and as an economic opportunity potential for many Aborigines. The Australian economy. Australia has a high standard of living in terms of many world and globalized terms of measure. They have a high gross national income, PPP. They have a high human development index value. Agriculture is one important aspect of their economy. Agricultural production, minerals, and industrial goods round out the majority of the Australian economy. UA tariffs have been placed some constraints on exports, especially to Britain, who in the past has been the largest trading partner with Australia. Manufacturing is generally a weaker link and is on smaller scale and is more like import substitution industrialization and for a local market with tariffs to restrict external competition. Australia's core is located in the southeast urban regions of Sydney and Melbourne. Both are seaports and both are located in the least environmentally limiting part of the country. Australia and New Zealand have had difficulty developing large manufacturing sectors in their economies. Australia's industrial capacity is primarily geared to import substitution industries that produce a small range of consumer goods for the domestic market, as well as partial processing of minerals and agricultural products, some heavy industries such as iron and steel. Manufacturing is concentrated in the state capitals where industry has access to available markets, fuel, business and government contracts, and both overseas and internal transportation systems. Furthermore, Australia's markets have become flooded with cheap Chinese manufactured goods of varying quality from imports. Attempted diversification, primarily through industrialization, have met with limited success in New Zealand. Although New Zealand has coal, gold, natural gas, some iron ore, and a few other minerals, production is dwarfed by Australia in that local region. The local market is small and dispersed, which restrains large-scale production and efficient marketing. The cost of skilled labor is high, and competition from overseas producers such as Japan and the United States can be severe. Most of the current manufacturing industries are high-cost productions that survive because they are protected by tariffs from New Zealand as well. Overall, manufacturing contributes to 24% of the national income in New Zealand and employs about 24% of the labor force. Historically, mining and ranching have dominated Australia's economy. Manufacturing has a much shorter history. Australia's market for manufactured good is too small to support profits on par with that of exporting mining products. It can import cheaper manufactured products from China and other Asian countries than it can produce, at least in many cases. Therefore, unlike mining and ranching, manufacturing is not a comparative advantage for Australia. Australia's workforce is small and finds more rewarding employment in the service sector industries in many major cities. Resources of Australia. The resources of Australia are very extensive in terms of natural resources. We can obviously start with the fact that many of the major cities, all the major cities are seaports on the coast, and fishing contributes much to the natural resource potential of Australia. We see large areas of ranching throughout much of the interior. We have the main interior, very little land use in the central part of Australia, which of course is primarily a desert. We have other major regions, including commercial grain farming in the southeast and the southwest, forestry in the far southeast and the far southwest, and intensive commercial farming along the east coast in the humid subtropical regions, and also in regions throughout the Mediterranean southeast and southwestern coastal regions. There are numerous major mines in the west we see with these red X's. Iron, silver, gold, copper, nickel are all extremely important minerals available here. Tin, magnesium, lead, phosphate. Phosphate, of course, is used for fertilizers. Uranium here in the north central. Tungsten is very important in New Zealand. Oddly enough, here just to the south. New Zealand, of course, also has lower quality brown coal and a small amount of natural gas available, as well as some gold and silver, and also iron, as we mentioned. We get back to the east coast of Australia, copper, zinc, silver, gold, phosphates, just a wide variety of both better quality black coal, some natural gas. As we move to the south, we see more brown coal and black coal mix, as well as some natural gas. In the west, we see petroleum and also petroleum and natural gas between Darwin and Timor-Leste in the Timor Sea, which is a newly developing oil region and petroleum region. In the interior of the country, we have gold, zinc, magnesium, phosphate, and silver. Iron also all available, although more expensive to access than that. Plentiful mineral and natural resource supply in the far west. Diamonds are also in the northern part of the country. Good availability of various quality of diamonds. And the mineral resources of Western Australia, this diagram and map are on page 550 of your text, and we see the regions of diamonds. Australia has almost 10% of the world production. Western Australia, that is. The specialty metals are very important in the Pilbara region here in the northwestern coast. Also, this region has plentiful natural gas, petroleum, even precious metals mined offshore. We move to the south, precious metals like nickel, rutile. And what is rutile? Rutile is actually can be used for the fact that it contains many heavy metals and ores mixed in with it. It's valuable as a pigment, especially for bright white colors in paints, plastics, and papers. It also has minerals that are good for the absorption of ultraviolet light, and the nanoparticles are often used in sunscreens to protect against skin damage. Also, rutile needles are present in many fine gems and add to the quality of those gems. Bauxite. Australia produces over 20% of world alumina resources, and Western Australia accounts for about 20% of that total. So the mineral resources of Western Australia are tremendous, even compared to the plentiful resources throughout the country. The vast majority of these resources are in the western part of Australia. What are the positive and negative aspects of the mining boom in the region? Negative aspects include long-term independence on export income from relatively low value-added minerals, which hinders diversification needed to survive downturns in foreign markets and the value of such materials. Also, you face diminishing mineral reserves, environmental degradation, and associated social problems with mining areas. The positive aspects, though, include revenues from mineral exports enriching the region via economic multiplier effect. Mining often occurs in otherwise far less economically productive regions, and it is an employer. But the arid region is the primary region of mineral resource acquisition in the western region of Australia. Mining often requires large amounts of water, and water pollution results from these mining operations. Much of the mining activity is on Aboriginal lands. The Aboriginal culture is deeply connected with water and land, and this creates much conflict between the money and cultural values. Short-term workers are employed to do much of the mining work. These workers may be from the eastern part of the country, or may be from other countries in Southeast Asia and the surrounding area. These short-term workers do not reinvest in the land and often pay remittances out of country for the salaries that they earn. The mining countries have not been known to reinvest in the region where they extract their mineral resources either. They tend to be going in for maximum profit and minimizing any kind of infrastructure development. The housing sector in these regions cannot keep up with the demand, resulting in a very high cost of living in Western Australia. Australian agriculture is famous for the cattle and sheep ranches, very remote and extensive, known as stations. Wheat farming. Wheat is the largest and more important export crop here. Sugarcane is commonly grown on the northern fringe. There are several well-known vineyards throughout the Mediterranean regions of the southwest and southeastern portions of Australia, and many of these are well-known vineyards producing high-quality wines on the international market. Australia export and trade. Here we're looking at exports, and we see that the majority of Australian export value goes to China. Next comes Japan, and then Taiwan. Korea also gets a portion of some of these resources. This is primarily in the form of natural resources and agricultural products. Some of these products also go to New Zealand, but that tends to be more manufactured goods and processed food substances. Other markets for exports from Australia include the United States and the United Kingdom, their original colonizer. Singapore also consumes many of the exports coming out of Australia, and of course transfers them off to other offshore manufacturing facilities in Malaysia and Indonesia. Import-wise, the majority of imports into Australia come from China, from the United States, and Japan, with additional imports coming from New Zealand, United Kingdom, Germany, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Thailand, as well as Singapore. Australia's overseas linkages have been changing recently. Since the United Kingdom has joined the European Union, Australia lost exclusivity to the United Kingdom's market for its mineral and agricultural products. Increasingly, however, Australia is trading with China, India, and other Asian countries whose export-oriented manufacturing economies are currently starring in the global economy. Australia may see itself more aligned economically with the Asian part of the Pacific Rim than with its traditional European trades and linkages. Obviously, with large mineral resources and the friction of distance, the high cost of moving large volumes of natural resources, it's easy to see why it's more economically feasible for Australia to trade with countries more closely aligned with its region. Australia tourism. In the 1980s, tourism began to grow as part of the service industries. More than 6 million visitors per year come to this region. Many, very similar to Southeast Asia, come from Southeast Asia, East Asia, and South Asia, but also they receive a large number of European and American tourists. Sydney, the Great Barrier Reef, and Uluru Rock are some of the biggest draws. We've read quite a bit about the Great Barrier Reef in our chapter. Uluru Rock is a massive sandstone monolith in the heart of the Northern Territory's Red Center Desert. It's the largest of one of several massive sandstone mountains in this area near about 450 kilometers outside of Alice Springs. It's sacred to indigenous Australians and believed to be about 700 million years old. It's a region where there's much ecotourism, cultural tourism, and adventure tourism in this region, but it's also in the center of a very powerful desert region. The future of Australia. Australia has enjoyed a remarkable economic growth in recent years. It has a relatively small population compared to the land size. This creates a slow development aspect of Australia. Isolation is another issue that gets in the way of continued economic growth, being so far removed from much of the centers of globalized economic trade. There's also this potential of ending its association with the British monarchy. That would probably reduce its trade with Europe and Great Britain in particular, the United Kingdom. But at the same time, as we discussed, growing trade with China and East and Southeast Asia have continued to fuel growth within Australia today. That's it for our Chapter 12, Lecture 2. We'll continue with our discussions of Chapter 12 in our next lecture. Thanks for being here, and I'll talk to you again soon.